92% of people who are killed in the United States knew their killer in some way. Let that sit with you for just a moment. If this is your first time on True Crime Vic, you need to understand something right now. This channel covers cases the way they deserve to be covered. Every fact you are about to hear is sourced from documented research, law enforcement statements, and expert testimony. If you care about cases being told with precision and respect, subscribe to True Crime Vic right now and turn on notifications. Because what Dr. Brucato said about this case is the most complete forensic framework anyone has put together on Nancy Guthrie. By the end of this analysis, you are going to understand something about this case that most people watching from the outside still do not fully grasp. Let us start from the beginning. Before I give you his analysis, you need to understand who is doing the analyzing. Dr. Gary Brucato is a forensic psychologist and clinical researcher. He is a visiting scholar at Boston College. He serves on the expert panel at the Cold Case Foundation. He co-authored a landmark book called The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime. He helped lead the development of the Columbia University Mass Murder Database, one of the most comprehensive research projects ever undertaken to examine the psychological traits of mass murderers. This is not someone who watches two crime documentaries and calls himself an expert. This is a man who has spent his career inside the data, inside the numbers, inside the documented patterns of how human beings commit violence against each other and why. He has been called to analyze cases that grip the nation. He analyzed Brian Koberger before the arrest in the Idaho murders. He was correct. His profile matched. Dr. Brucato is not on television to fill airtime. When he speaks about a case, he brings decades of published research with him. And when he brought that research to the Nancy Guthrie case, the conclusion he reached was one of the most disturbing things said out loud about this investigation. But before the forensics, before the statistics, before Dr. Brucato says a single word, you need to picture her, 84 years old, 5 feet tall, a woman who outlived her husband, raised 3 children mostly on her own after he died in a mining accident in Mexico, and built herself a quiet life in the Catalina foothills neighborhood of Tucson. She had been in that same house for over 50 years. Same street, same garden, same Sunday church pew. Her name is Nancy Ellen Long Guthrie, born January 27, 1942, in Fort Wayne, Kentucky. Her oldest daughter is Savannah Guthrie. Yes, that's Savannah Guthrie, the anchor of the Today Show on NBC. Her other daughter is Annie, married to an Italian-born musician named Tommaso Cion. Her son is Cameron. Now here is something her doctors already knew that most people outside this case do not fully appreciate. Nancy had a pacemaker. She needed daily medication. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos stood in front of cameras and said this publicly. She could not walk 50 yards on her own under normal conditions. 50 yards. That is half a football field. She could not cover that distance without difficulty. Keep that in your mind because it matters enormously when you try to understand what happened next. January 30th, first, a Tuesday evening. Nothing unusual. Nancy had dinner at Annie and Tommaso's home. Routine family meal. She ate, she visited. Nothing about that evening raised a single flag. At 9:48 that night, Tommaso drove her home. He said he walked her to her front door. He confirmed she went inside. He got back in his car. He left. The house was quiet. Then the night changed. At 1:47 in the morning, the doorbell camera at Nancy's home picked up a figure standing on her front porch, masked, armed, nitrile gloves on both hands, a small backpack on their back. That figure did not rush, did not panic, stood there calmly, then reached over and covered the camera lens with foliage taken from a potted plant sitting right there on the porch. At that exact same moment, and this detail is what separates this case from almost every other missing person case you have ever followed, Nancy's pacemaker registered a cardiac spike. Her heart rate surged. The device recorded it, documented it, time-stamped it. Her body was telling the truth, even when she could not. At 2:28 in the morning, The pacemaker went silent. Its wireless connection to the bedside monitoring unit dropped. No more data, no more signal. 8 minutes later, at 2:36, a ring camera 2.5 miles away on a street called Camino Royal caught a vehicle traveling south, consistent with a Kia Soul, heading toward the Mexican border, 60 miles away. That is the last electronic trace. Now it is May 2026. More than 100 days have passed. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. No body, no confirmed location, no arrest, no charges. And that is exactly where Dr. Gary Brucato stepped in, with data, with numbers, with a framework built from decades of published research, because someone needed to stop guessing and start calculating. Dr. Brucato did not start his analysis by telling you what he thought happened. He started by telling you what did not happen, because in forensic science, you eliminate the impossible first. What remains, however disturbing, is where the truth lives. The first thing he eliminated was sexual motivation. This needs to be said clearly and directly, because it is sometimes raised in online discussions about this case. Dr. Brucato was unambiguous. Sexual motivation was not on the table. The reason comes down to documented criminal psychology and a specific type of paraphilia called gerontophilia, which means sexual attraction to elderly individuals. Dr. Brucato described this paraphilia as documented as virtually never occurring in criminal cases. And when such offenders do operate, they always show serial behavior. They commit the same type of offense repeatedly. You would see a pattern of similar crimes in the same geographic area. Multiple elderly victims in the Tucson area. A signature, something law enforcement could track. There was no such pattern. Nothing. Not one case in Tucson that preceded Nancy's disappearance and matched this profile. Beyond the statistics, the physical evidence at Nancy's home pointed entirely away from sexual motivation. There were no biological fluids found at the scene consistent with sexual assault. There were no fantasy elements that typically accompany sexually motivated crimes. Those offenders leave behind indicators of their obsessions, elements that fulfill whatever specific fantasy is driving their behavior. None of that was present at Nancy's home. Sexual motivation was eliminated completely. The second scenario Dr. Brucato examined was simple robbery. On the surface, this might seem possible. Elderly woman, living alone, nice neighborhood, a home worth examining for valuables. But the evidence destroyed this theory immediately. Nothing was taken. Think about that. Someone entered this home. Someone who planned this entry in advance. Someone who was armed and wearing gloves. And nothing of value was removed from the property. If you break into a home to steal, you take something, jewelry, electronics, cash, anything with resale value. Items of value remained untouched in Nancy Guthrie's home. The robbery theory was dead. But Dr. Brucato went further. What about kidnapping for ransom? That is a financial crime. It does not require taking physical objects from the home. It requires taking the person. Here is where the timeline becomes critical. Dr. Brucato's research into ransom kidnapping revealed a very specific pattern. Ransom demands are almost always made within 24 to 48 hours of the abduction, not days later, not weeks later, within the first 2 days. And these cases are typically resolved within 1 week. The reason is pragmatic. Every additional hour a kidnapper holds a victim increases their risk of being caught. The victim is what Dr. Brucato called precious cargo, something of high value that needs to be preserved and returned as quickly as possible to collect the money and eliminate the exposure. In genuine ransom cases, there is always proof of life. The kidnappers have to demonstrate the victim is alive and well. They have to show she is being cared for, because without that proof, nobody pays. Nancy Guthrie was gone for more than 100 days. When Dr. Brucato gave his analysis, no official ransom demand had been verified by law enforcement. No confirmed proof of life had been offered to the public. Nancy did not have her medication with her. She had a documented cardiac condition. None of that fits the profile of someone being held as precious cargo. A victim without medication. A victim with a serious heart condition, being held for months without any confirmed public communication from captors. That is not how kidnapping for ransom operates anywhere in the documented research. Simple robbery was eliminated. Ransom kidnapping was eliminated. That brought Dr. Brucato to the third category. Abduction as a standalone crime, separate from ransom, is extraordinarily rare in the United States. Dr. Brucato's research showed there are only approximately 350 abductions per year in the entire country. The entire country, across all 50 states. That is fewer than one per day nationally. The overwhelming majority of those 350 cases involve children, not elderly adults. Abducting an 84-year-old woman is statistically highly unusual under any framing. But Dr. Brucato kept digging. He looked at what happens in the cases that do occur, and he found the detail that became the foundation of everything that followed. In documented abduction cases, the abductor almost always knows the victim in some capacity. And then he turned to the homicide data. Because when you eliminate sexual motivation, when you eliminate robbery, when you eliminate ransom, when an 84-year-old woman with a heart condition is missing for over 100 days without confirmed proof of life, you are looking at a probable homicide. And this is where Dr. Brucato introduced the number that changed this case. According to multiple research sources, that Dr. Brucato cited on Brian Entin Investigates, between 76 and 92% of people who are killed in the United States knew their killer in some way. The upper figure, 92%, comes from the most recent and comprehensive analyses of national homicide data. 92%, not 75, not 50, 92. Dr. Brucato was explicit about what the word knowing means in this context. It does not require a close personal relationship. It does not require friendship or family connection. It could be a contractor who once worked on the property, someone Nancy recognized from a grocery store she visited regularly, a delivery driver who made routine stops at her home, a service provider who came to her property, someone who provided medical or home care. The connection could be intimate, or it could be passing, but statistically, it existed. When that number, 92%, is applied to the Nancy Guthrie case, the conclusion is almost mathematically unavoidable. Whoever took Nancy Guthrie had crossed paths with her before. Now Dr. Brucato turned his attention to the security footage, and what he said about the masked figure on Nancy's doorbell camera was something that multiple criminal profilers had noticed from the very beginning of this case. But nobody had explained with the clinical precision that Brucato brought to it. The person on that camera was, in Dr. Brucato's words, way too cool under pressure, not even flinching. To understand why that matters, you need to understand what stress looks like in criminal behavior. Even career criminals, people who commit crimes repeatedly and professionally, show physiological signs of stress in the act: elevated heart rate, rapid movement, checking over their shoulder, rushing through their actions. These are not choices. These are autonomic responses. The body does these things whether the person wants it to or not. Fear of being caught produces observable behaviors in virtually every criminal. The person on Nancy's camera showed none of those signs. They moved with a calm that Dr. Brucato identified as a potential indicator of psychopathic character structure. Psychopathy is a clinical term. It refers to a specific constellation of personality traits: lack of empathy, lack of remorse, and critically, a blunted fear response. People with genuine psychopathic traits do not experience fear the way most humans do. Situations that would cause overwhelming anxiety in a normal person simply do not trigger the same neurological response. That is why the figure on that footage could stand at a porch camera in the early hours of the morning, about to commit a serious felony, and appear composed. But Dr. Brucato added something that most people missed about this profile. People with psychopathic character structure have a long documented history, decades of behavior that others remember, either inappropriate behavior that made people uncomfortable or outright criminal behavior that brought them into contact with law enforcement. Psychopathy does not develop overnight. It is a pattern. It builds over years. It leaves a trail, incidents, confrontations, arrests, records. This person, Dr. Brucato said, almost certainly had prior contact with law enforcement. Somewhere in the system there were records. And there was another behavioral trait that Dr. Brucato highlighted, one that created a specific investigative pathway. People with psychopathic traits are far more reactive to perceived insults than they are to actual threats to themselves. This is counterintuitive. You would assume someone would respond more strongly to genuine danger than to a minor slight. But the research shows the opposite. These individuals are hypersensitive to anything perceived as disrespect, being challenged, being shortchanged, being insulted, and their reactions are wildly disproportionate to the offense. The guy who completely lost control because someone cut him off in a parking lot. The person who screamed at a cashier over 99 cents. The individual who held a grudge for years over something most people would forget in an hour. People remember those encounters. And Dr. Brucato said investigators should be talking to community members who have had what he called nasty run-ins with a grudge-holding, volatile person in the Tucson area, because that specific behavioral signature is something witnesses carry with them. It is memorable. Here is where Dr. Brucato's analysis takes a turn that most people have not fully processed. The person on the camera made mistakes, real mistakes, amateurish mistakes. The holster was worn incorrectly, positioned in a way that could actually be dangerous to the person wearing it. The firearm, visible in the footage, did not match the holster, indicating a lack of genuine familiarity with weapons, despite carrying one. They brought what appeared to be foliage or flowers to the house, a detail that Dr. Brucato specifically called out as bizarre. Unless you are an absolute imbecile, why would you do that? Those were his exact words. It is a question, he said, that will probably make sense later, once investigators understand the full premise of what happened. And most critically, this person was caught on camera at all. A genuinely skilled criminal with serious operational training would have disabled or avoided the security system entirely before approaching. So here is the paradox that Dr. Brucato identified. The person on that footage was composed enough to stand at a camera without showing a fear response, but also foolish enough to make basic errors that a truly sophisticated criminal would never make. Dr. Brucato described this as someone who was not particularly bright, but was willing to do horrible things, comfortable with violence, but not skilled at executing it cleanly. And this paradox pointed directly toward his most important conclusion. This person did not act alone. Think about what that means. If the individual on camera was calm but careless, skilled in demeanor but sloppy in execution, then they were likely following instructions, playing a role, carrying out a plan that someone else designed. Dr. Brucato used an analogy: the waiter and the chef. The person you see on camera is the waiter, the person who delivers the meal, but someone else, someone you do not see, is in the back preparing it. The chef, the architect, the planner. This reframes everything about the investigation, because if you are looking for one person with one motive, you are missing half the equation. If this was orchestrated, then there are at least two relationships to map: Nancy's connection to the person on camera, and Nancy's connection to whoever put that person there. And when you layer the 92% statistic over that structure, the investigative focus becomes even sharper. Both of those individuals, statistically, had some form of prior contact with Nancy Guthrie. Not strangers, not random, known. That is what the data tells us. That is what the behavioral analysis supports. That is what Dr. Gary Brucato, one of the most credentialed forensic psychologists in the country, concluded after examining every available piece of evidence in this case. Nancy Guthrie knew the person who took her, or she knew the person who sent them, or she knew both. The mathematics of homicide in America do not leave much room for another explanation. 100 days, no medication, a pacemaker that went silent at 2:28 in the morning, a vehicle heading south toward a border 60 miles away, a family waiting for answers, a daughter on national television every morning, carrying this weight in front of millions of people, and somewhere in the data, in the documented patterns, in the research, that Dr. Brucato has spent decades compiling. The framework for understanding what happened to Nancy Guthrie already exists. The question is whether investigators can connect the dots before the trail goes completely cold. If this analysis opened your eyes to something you did not see before, do two things right now. Hit the like button on this video and subscribe to True Crime Vic, because this is only part one. There is more to this case that Dr. Brucato revealed. Details about what was found when investigators finally saw inside a suspect's home. Evidence that raised questions nobody has answered publicly, yet you do not want to miss what comes next. This is True Crime Vic. We cover cases the way they deserve to be covered, with precision, with respect, and with the facts that matter. Dr. Brucato used an analogy that I want you to hold on to, because it is the clearest way anyone has explained the structure of this crime. He said the person on the camera was the waiter, visible, present, the face of the operation, the one delivering the meal, but not the one who created it. Behind the scenes, Dr. Brucato said, there was a chef, someone who planned this, someone who orchestrated it, someone who gave the order and directed the execution without ever standing in front of a camera, someone who thought this through and concluded that using another person to do the physical work was the smart move. The waiter does not decide what is on the menu. The waiter just brings it to the table. Now, here is what makes the chef so much more disturbing than the waiter. The waiter, the person on the camera, fits a specific visible profile. Volatile, history of aggressive behavior, prior criminal record, known in the community for explosive reactions to small slights. Someone people remember for the wrong reasons. The chef is the opposite. The chef would appear pro-social. Dr. Brucato used that specific clinical word, superficially pro-social, meaning this individual looks kind, looks normal, looks trustworthy. They might have even seemed warm and helpful to Nancy herself. But beneath that surface was a financial reason to want Nancy gone. And that is where Dr. Brucato connected everything back to the 92%. If this was financially motivated, and if the person behind it was someone who appeared pro-social and kind to Nancy, then that person was not a stranger. That person was in her orbit. They had some reason to be around her, some legitimate or semi-legitimate access to her life, her home, her finances, her daily routine. Dr. Brucato introduced a concept that he has written about extensively in his academic work, a category of crime called elimination murder. Elimination murder is exactly what it sounds like. You eliminate, through homicide, a person you know because that person is standing between you and something you want. The motive can take several forms. Financial inheritance, someone whose death results in assets changing hands, someone whose continued existence prevents another person from accessing money, property, or an estate. Burden elimination, someone whose care has become expensive, time-consuming, or simply incompatible with the life another person wants to live. Witness removal, someone who knows too much, someone who has seen or figured out something that the perpetrator cannot allow to remain known. The hallmark of elimination murder that Dr. Brucato has documented across many cases is the staging. The perpetrator works very hard to make it look like a total stranger came in, for no clear reason, and committed the crime. They manufacture the appearance of randomness. They construct a scene that points investigators away from anyone with a personal connection to the victim. But because the people who commit elimination murders are rarely sophisticated planners, they always fail at the staging in one critical way. They do not fake the elements that would actually motivate a stranger to act. They do not fake a robbery convincingly because nothing of real value is taken. They do not fake a sexual assault because there is no actual sexual component to their motivation. They fake the surface details, but leave the motivational structure completely empty. And that gap between what the scene is supposed to look like and what it actually shows is what points investigators directly back toward the people in the victim's personal world. Look at Nancy's home. Nothing of value was taken. No sexual assault indicators, a staged blood trail, a strategically opened back door. Someone went to great effort to make this look like a random intrusion and left behind a scene that actually tells investigators the exact opposite. Dr. Brucato said on camera to TMZ, and I want to quote him directly because these are his words, "It is entirely possible that she was not actually taken from there or killed there. It is entirely possible that happened elsewhere, and somebody staged blood in the front of the house, the door being opened in the back, and so forth to give the impression of an abduction, but she was actually killed somewhere else, or whatever fate befell her, somewhere else." Those are his words, directly attributed from a documented public interview. He went further. He said the level of manipulation in this case indicates a mastermind, someone who planned this staging, someone who thought carefully about what law enforcement would see when they arrived, someone who was smart enough to construct a false narrative, but not smart enough to make it fully convincing. The most disturbing conclusion here is where I need to slow down, because what comes next is not easy to say, and Dr. Brucato acknowledged that when he said it. If Nancy Guthrie is deceased, and Dr. Brucato said the probability of her being alive is very low, then the statistical reality about what happened to her body is something her family has had to quietly prepare themselves for. Dr. Brucato said it this way: if she is deceased, there is a very low probability she will ever be found intact. Criminals in 2026 are aware of how forensic science works. They know that a single strand of hair can produce a DNA profile. They know that dental records can identify fragmentary remains. They know that trace biology can survive conditions that seem impossible, and they act accordingly. They place remains in remote areas where animal scavenging disperses biological material across a wide radius. They use fire. They use dismemberment. They use methods designed specifically to ensure that nothing of sufficient size is ever recovered for identification. Dr. Brucato said he would be, and I am quoting his words from the transcript, absolutely flabbergasted if there were intact remains to be found. That is not a throwaway line. That is the documented conclusion of a man who has spent his career studying how people dispose of evidence in crimes exactly like this one. And yet, and this is important, the absence of remains does not mean the absence of justice. Mixed DNA was found at Nancy Guthrie's home. Mixed DNA means genetic material from more than one individual. Separating individual profiles from mixed DNA is meticulous, time-consuming laboratory work. Dr. Brucato noted that establishing clean individual profiles from mixed samples can take up to a year. That timeline has frustrated people watching this case from the outside. But it is simply the reality of the science. Once those profiles are established, they can be submitted to genealogical databases. This is the same technique that cracked the Golden State Killer case after more than 40 years. By uploading DNA profiles to platforms that compare them against voluntary submissions from relatives, investigators can build family trees. They can narrow suspects to a specific individual, even if that person has never been arrested or had their DNA in any criminal database. C.C. Moore, the genetic genealogist who helped solve the Golden State Killer case and dozens of others, has been named in connection with the forensic analysis in Nancy's case. That single fact matters more than most people realize. When C.E. Moore gets involved in a case, answers follow. A hair sample was found at Nancy's home. A glove was recovered approximately 2 miles away. Both pieces of biological evidence are at the FBI laboratory in Quantico being analyzed, being processed at whatever timeline the science requires. Dr. Brucato said this directly. He believes this case will be solved, not because of gut instinct, but because the evidence pathways, when followed with patience and resources, converge on a finite set of answers. The genealogical database approach has solved cases that were cold for decades. There is no reason it cannot solve this one. If you are still watching, you understand this case is not about guessing. It is about following the data to the only logical conclusions it supports. That is what True Crime Vic does differently. We break down the forensic psychology, the behavioral evidence, and the investigative pathways that actually matter. If that is the kind of coverage you want, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because cases like this require patience, precision, and a willingness to wait for the science to do what it does best. One piece of Dr. Brucato's analysis that has not gotten the attention it deserves is his assessment of where this person is. He said the perpetrator, or at least the orchestrator, is local, not local in a vague way, local in a specific, documentable way. Someone who knew the layout of Nancy's property. Someone who knew her schedule, her routine, her vulnerabilities. Someone who had knowledge of the inside of her home and the pattern of her daily life. You do not acquire that kind of knowledge from a distance. You acquire it through proximity, through presence, through some form of recurring contact that builds a picture of how someone lives when they are most vulnerable and when the window of opportunity opens. The 350 abductions per year that Dr. Brucato cited are overwhelmingly committed by people in the victim's geographic and social radius. Nancy Guthrie's attacker is almost certainly in Tucson, almost certainly in her documented world, almost certainly someone who, if you knew both of them, you would recognize as someone who had a reason to be around her. Reports surfaced early in this investigation of communications claiming to be from Nancy's captors. Law enforcement has not officially confirmed their authenticity or content. Dr. Brucato addressed this carefully. Without seeing the actual text of any communication, definitive analysis is impossible. That is his word, impossible. But he said something important about the behavioral psychology of ransom communications sent after the window for genuine ransom has already closed. If the notes were real, and that is a large if, then sending them after the critical 48-hour window has passed serves no practical financial purpose. You are not negotiating. You are not in position to collect. The logistics of a genuine exchange are not workable at that stage, which means if someone was sending communications, they were doing it for a different reason. Sadism, the enjoyment of taunting a grieving family, the need to remain present in the story, the narcissistic compulsion to be known as the person who did this, even while evading consequences. That behavioral pattern, Dr. Brucato noted, is documented in offenders with psychopathic and narcissistic character structures. They cannot resist the attention. They cannot stay silent, even when silence is the tactically intelligent choice. And he said something else about this. The entire framing of the crime as financially motivated might be a deliberate misdirection, a way to point investigators toward a financial narrative when the real motivation behind the crime was something more personal, something more intimate, something the perpetrator needed to hide beneath a layer of apparent logic. Dr. Brucato returned to the waiter and chef framework for his final investigative recommendations, and this is where the analysis becomes genuinely actionable. If two people were involved, and the data strongly suggests these two tiers of participation, then there is a structural vulnerability in this conspiracy. Groups have weak links. Accomplices turn on each other, especially when money is involved, especially when the stakes are prison versus freedom. The reward in the Nancy Guthrie case has grown to over $1 million. $1 million for information leading to her recovery. Dr. Brucato noted something that sounds cynical, but is documented in criminal research. There is very little honor among thieves. Money is a powerful inducement. It has broken far tighter conspiracies than this one. But then he raised the question that haunts the case. Why has nobody come forward for $1 million? He offered 3 documented possibilities. The first, the accomplice is dead, eliminated by the mastermind to remove the liability of a living witness who knows the full picture. The larger the chain of people with knowledge, the greater the risk. And eliminating that risk through violence is a documented pattern in crimes like this. The second, the accomplice genuinely does not know the identity of the person who hired them. Criminal operations with a sophisticated organizer sometimes involve complete informational separation between tiers. The muscle knows what to do. They do not know who ultimately gave the order. The third, the conspiracy is tighter than law enforcement has been able to penetrate so far. The people involved are not in the general public. They are in a closed circle, and the reward has not reached the right person yet. Each of these possibilities represents a different investigative pathway. And Dr. Brucato said, once the first arrest is made, regardless of which tier that person represents, the rest of the truth tends to follow quickly. One person in custody, facing the reality of prison versus cooperation, changes the entire dynamic. Let me give you Dr. Gary Brucato's complete suspect profile exactly as he laid it out, so you have it in one place. The person responsible, or persons, are almost certainly male. At least one male was physically present. There are probable accomplices. This was not a solo operation. The motivation was financial, not sexual, not random. Financial, something tied to Nancy's assets, her estate, or something she controlled or knew. The perpetrator or perpetrators knew Nancy in some capacity. The 92% demands it. Their lives intersected with hers in some documented way. The person on the camera, the visible tier, is someone comfortable with violence, but not particularly intelligent. Likely has prior criminal history and law enforcement contact. Known in the Tucson community for volatility, for disproportionate reactions to small provocations, for holding grudges, for being someone people remember having a bad encounter with. The person behind the camera, the organizing tier, presents as pro-social, kind, even helpful, living what Dr. Brucato called a double life, has a specific financial reason to want Nancy gone, had some legitimate access to her world, appeared trustworthy to her, smiled at her, was someone she had no documented reason to fear. And somewhere between those two people is the full truth of what happened to Nancy Guthrie on the night of January 31st. Dr. Brucato ended his analysis on Brian Entin, investigates with something that I think is important for Nancy's family, and for everyone following this case. He said this will be solved, not hoped, not wished. He said people think criminal cases resolve like television programs, 42 minutes plus commercials. The reality is that complex DNA analysis takes months or years. Genealogical database work requires patient, methodical comparison across thousands of family trees. Building a case solid enough to hold up in court under the scrutiny of the best defense attorneys money can buy, requires absolute certainty at every evidentiary step. He said the fact that certain details have not been released publicly does not mean the investigation is stalled. It may mean exactly the opposite. Strategic silence from investigators is often a sign that leads are being pursued carefully, quietly, in ways that do not alert the people being investigated. Evidence is being held close to the vest. Evidence that, when released at the right moment, will serve a prosecutorial purpose, rather than just a media one. Dr. Brucato's professional opinion, based on his work with the Columbia University Mass Murder Database, his years on the Cold Case Foundation expert panel, and his decades of published research into violent crime, is that the convergence of DNA genealogy analysis and systematic investigation into people with documented access to Nancy's life will produce a name. It will take time, but the evidence pathways lead somewhere. They always lead somewhere. Think about the last dinner you had with your mother, the food, the conversation, the way you said goodbye at the door. Nancy had that dinner January 31st with her daughter, with her son-in-law. She ate, she laughed, she went home, and she never came back. She is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker sitting inside her chest right now. That device recorded the exact moment her world fell apart. 2:28 in the morning, and then silence. Savannah Guthrie anchors the Today Show every morning. She sits in that chair. She does her job, and somewhere behind those eyes is a daughter who does not know where her mother is. That is the weight this family carries every single day. Here is what I need from you before you leave. If something in this video triggered a memory, a name, a face, a conversation you overheard, someone in Tucson who always made you uneasy, do not scroll past it. Do not talk yourself out of it. The Pima County Sheriff's Department is accepting tips. The FBI is accepting tips. Anonymous. No name required. $1 million unclaimed. One phone call could be the reason this family finally gets an answer. Nancy deserves that. Her daughters deserve that. And whoever did this deserves exactly what is coming for them. Dr. Brucato laid out the forensic roadmap. The DNA is being processed. The genealogical databases are being built. The investigative circle is tightening. Somewhere in Tucson, someone knows something. Someone saw something. Someone heard something that did not sit right, and that someone might be you. If this analysis gave you clarity on a case that has been covered everywhere but understood almost nowhere, do 3 things right now. Like this video so the algorithm knows this is the kind of content people actually want. Subscribe to True Crime Vic, because we are going to follow this case all the way to resolution, however long that takes, and share this video with anyone who has been following Nancy's story, because the more people who understand the actual forensic framework, the more pressure stays on the people who need to feel it. This is True Crime Vic. We do not sensationalize. We do not speculate. We follow the data. We trust the science. And we wait for justice. Because justice does not run on a television schedule. It runs on evidence. And the evidence in this case is building towards something. Nancy Guthrie's story is not over. Not by a long way. And when the arrests come, when the DNA matches, when the genealogical tree narrows to a single name, you will hear it here first, with the facts, with the respect this family deserves, and with the precision that honors Nancy's memory. Stay with us, stay informed, and if you know something, say something. This is True Crime Vic. Thank you for watching.